I think it's cool to talk about this in terms of how people traditionally invest, right? When you're thinking about where to put your money in the stock market, or if they're in mutual funds, or if it's in your company 401k, you usually have choices, right? There's the aggressive growth fund, and then there's the balanced, strategic conservative portfolio. And some have, more equities and some have more bonds. You can kind of do the same thing with real estate markets, right? You've got, if you wanted to be super speculative, right, you wouldn't care about cash flow. You'd probably invest in California, right, where you see sometimes insanely high appreciation. Your cash flow is negative every single month. So that's a riskier portfolio. And then you've got, your markets, which are really cash flow heavy, even heavier than Jacksonville, right? Usually those are in the Midwest. You can get some really great cash flows there. Maybe those are your conservative and your bond heavy portfolio. And then you've got markets where you can actually get both, like Jacksonville or Atlanta, like it's talking about. So it's really cool to see it through both lenses there. You can accomplish very similar things according to what's important for you in your investing strategy. And then I think some people have thought about going to different markets, but they really struggle to find the right property management company. And I know how you've understood that from the very beginning. Could you give people some insight into how you exactly decided to invest and what you were looking at to make sure that the property manager was up to your standard as well as the market?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, because the bottom, the most important part that I've found through this entire process is that it really comes down to having a good property manager. Nothing happens without good property management. It is, and I've gone through the gamut at this point. I mean, talking about like that first house that I bought in Houston, I've literally had the same tenant the entire time, but I've gone through 4 different property managers in Houston, which
Wow.
And it's not something you want to do. So, it's just because not everybody is the same. Not everybody gives you response time. So everybody's different. So, but you kind of have to kiss a lot of, kiss a lot of frogs, I guess would be the right, I don't know if it's the right term or not, but you have to just go through it. The biggest shortcut to avoiding kissing a lot of frogs is going to where people where you basically go through referrals. I mean, referrals and kind of and reputation are a big deal. So you have to have, it's kind of like going back to using other people's mistakes. People have a reputation, and really kind of just finding the right team that works with you is really important. So I can't emphasize that more, but that's literally the most important thing out of this entire process. So it's the housing literally is kind of the last piece.
So let's take that frog that you kissed in Houston, where the property management company is turned over 4 times. What's a lesson that you learned, maybe you put into play later on when you found other companies like JWB that you've enjoyed working with? What's something that you could teach others to do differently if you could change it again with that Houston property?
I mean, with the Houston property, one of the things is that I wish I would have done more, and it would have saved me more headache, is to literally fly and go meet them, like meet the team in person. If you can do that, I mean, that's not always feasible. I mean, I know, but it's especially if you're trying to buy a lot in different areas. But that's like the number one thing, that if you can do that, then absolutely do that. If you can't, then some of the things that you want to do is basically see if you can get like some kind of reporting from them, like if they have any idea of what their numbers are as far as turnover. And you want to look over the expenses, but I mean the expenses, it's the expenses is pretty secondary. It's really kind of how they position things and what it's like you just kind of, it's like interviewing like anybody. It's like you have to just interview them. You have to talk with a property manager. And if you're not used to doing it, it takes a little bit of practice. I would say that having like a schedule of what you want to get done, like if you want, you should absolutely have your properties. And so if you don't have like an inspection schedule or something to that effect, then that's something that's really important to have. And if they can't provide, that was the biggest hang up in Houston, is I still don't have I've had a few inspections, but there's still work that needs to be done. There's nothing that it's a disaster still. So I'm looking at probably selling the house I've never sold anything, so it's going to be a whole nother process, but I'm literally selling it because of management. And it's and there's no other reason. Well, it doesn't matter. But so number 1, get inspections done. Number 2, interview everybody. Actually, and if you can just develop a relationship with them would be the ideal. And try to do phone calls as much as you can rather than just emails, because emails can get back. That's how I would do it. So just try to build a relationship with them and kind of see how
I think it's sage advice. And I know there's a lot of folks that are in the chat right now, and I see the chat lighting up, that have purchased in multiple areas across the country. So if you guys have some ideas on things that you've done well to support others who might be thinking about doing the same thing, fire those in the chat, and for our friends on Facebook as well. This is meant to learn from the group. So really sage advice there for sure. For us, when it comes to property management, I guess we live in a bubble here where, communication for JWB is so critical. But what I find for outside property management companies, it's certainly not that way. When you talk to other property management companies, many times they don't feel like it's their responsibility to give you a phone call routinely. Many times they don't even feel like it's their responsibility to give you a phone call when something is going wrong. They expect you just to see it maybe in the reporting that they offer, or maybe they don't really offer reporting, or maybe it's not very in depth. So definitely make sure that the communication standards, are understood and they're up to your standard, because it's an industry that for many years was just mom and pops. It was just folks, and I say this sort of joking, but that accidentally got into becoming a property management company. Many times they were real estate agents that wanted some more of a consistent income stream, and they got into property management. That's not the same experience you're going to find if your standards are really high and you want to make this a big part of your overall financial portfolio. You want to have somebody who has a higher standard of communication. I think that's at the core edge is probably the biggest differentiator, I would imagine, through other property management companies. Would you?
Yeah. And just to kind of piggyback on what you're saying, I mean, one of the things that I've kind of developed is kind of like just a call schedule on my schedule to like go out and be in touch with the property manager. So just make it part of your routine, like part of like once a month, make sure that that you can look over the reporting. And if you don't understand the reporting, then call whoever the representative is over there that you have, and kind of have them go through it with you. And you'll find out very quickly like how things like come to light, how some things don't come to light, and how the communication is, because you end up chasing the property manager, and that's not what you want. What you want is kind of a good relationship, but it's much more difficult than you would imagine it to be if you've never done it before. So it's something that seems obvious, but it just doesn't work out that way in real life.
And I think when JWB put our standards in place for our communication, our customer service, we had Ed Cernobori in mind because, right, that type of a monthly phone call is so critical, right? It can be somewhat transactional in nature, but it can also turn very strategic, right? And again, if this is something that's going to be a big part of your portfolio, it's almost less of a property management phone call and more of an asset management type of a conversation that you need to be having with your quote unquote property manager.
Yeah. And Ed, I know that you have invested in a couple of different ways. I know that you've gone the turnkey route. I know that you've gone a couple of other routes, which we're going to get into in a second, but we have a question here in the Q&A from a listener from France. Name is Anonymous Attendé. And they ask, did you buy before having property management in place, or do you put, what do you get first, the property, or do you have the management in place before you get the property?
So I can tell you the wrong way to do it is to basically buy the property first and then get the property management. I've done that. So don't do that if you can help it. The best way to do it is to basically, after you've identified the area, is to, in an ideal perfect world, you would find the area after doing research, be comfortable with the location, and then finding the property management. And then you do that through interviewing different property management. And then after that, even if you're buying the house on your own and fixing it up on your own and then handing it over, and it doesn't have to be turnkey, that's kind of, those are like the three basic steps. So, but you can also, because the property manager will help, they can even help you find properties if they don't have them themselves, or like obviously through JWB, they literally have inventory that you can buy from them. So you can you'll have more options with somebody that's more, that has, somebody that's more seasoned and has that capability.